I'd like to hear from you a little bit about your background and what you're doing right now. And then I'd like to ask you a bunch of questions.
Yes. Well, I was born in Rio.
Okay.
Rio is a big city, many millions of people living in the place. Rio has the largest uh, urban forest in the world,
Oh,
and the forest was completely removed in mid 19th century. It was
oh,
completely removed to the ground.
oh,
So huge floods started, erosion, like crazy erosion, and then uh, the government, by the time was still an empire, decided to change the thing and replant the forest. So they replanted the forest using kind of the same approach that they were using here in Portugal, in Sintra area, but not same species, of course. So they used most of the local species, and also they brought some species from the outside. Of course, it was enslaved people labor that did all the job. And for too long time, just a man took the credits for himself. But the man barely did anything. He was just a count living in a huge mansion in the middle of this coffee plantation. And then he was kind of hired by the emperor to to do the work. So he put his slaves to do everything. And what they did was basically planting back 30,000 hectares by hand. It was 180 years ago, more or less. And since I remember, the forest is very much alive, is happy, is full of life. So walking and hiking and trekking in this forest was my first school.
yeah.
So I grew up in the trails of this forest before moving to Curitiba. That was when I was 18. So all my childhood and teenaging was spent around this area with this forest. So kind of my roots are in Rio
Mhm.
or in this forest specifically. Uh, Then, after moving to Curitiba, this other big city in South Brazil, I was already too deeply involved in all the environmental stuff. By then, I didn't know some names or some specifics about environmental works like ecological restoration. I didn't know the technical name for this, but I was already doing this in many different ways through Boy Scouting, through participating in some organizations, and so on. So after trying here and there different courses, I took my bachelor in philosophy, and everything in philosophy have always been oriented to philosophy of ecology.
Oh,
So uh, I started having some questions about time, space, gravity, and how they can influence will and energy and matter.
mm,
So this 12 shapes of existence were intertwined, and those would be my first writings in philosophy of ecology some 20 years ago. Um, and then kept going with philosophy. I took a postgrad in agroecology. So I went to Spain to study agroecology. I was already working with agroecology for some time, uh, first in public policies, defining and negotiating public policies in agroecology. In the state of Paraná, I was the Secretary of State there. And then moving a bit further south, I went to work in another organization, still in agroecology. So then I went to Spain for longer time studies, and that coincides with the actual project I'm still in. It was 18 years ago, and it's still the same project. The project is called Climate Design, and
Yeah.
this is the main work of it's my main work. So this project is about doing ecological restoration in the scale that matters to influence climate.
Right. Right.
Everything goes around the assumption that we are not victims of the climate. We are the very people who are making climate happen this way. So it's about, in the first place, taking responsibility for our actions and understanding how science gives us the understanding that we are responsible for what we are doing, and establishing a causality line between bad science, bad technology, bad politics, bad outcomes. So the whole climate design project is about understanding this in the first place and acting towards it to fix the problem from its roots. So behaving with science as scientists and people who can understand knowledge and apply knowledge through a positive narrative.
And this is in Spain?
No, this started in Brazil in 2005.
Okay.
So the science behind this is the science of the flying rivers, the small water cycle,
Right.
the
Right.
aquatic pumps. So before learning about other people, I was already writing about it, giving courses, giving conferences in the universities, in international gatherings such the World Social Forum. And only in 2011, I met the other person who was by then also working with this. So
Okay.
I had already some time in the subject before meeting someone else who would understand what you're talking about and who got to the same conclusions.
So the climate design project is yours?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm real excited to say I never knew this about you, because that's exactly what I'm doing. I mean, that's exactly my understanding, is that we don't need to be victims. We have huge capacity to do stuff, but we do have to do it. And it
Yes.
does take a lot of us.
Yeah, and the whole thing about the climate design project is that it's about scale. We look
Okay.
we take a scale and we put 2 grams in one side and 9,990 grams in the other side, and we see what happens. And we pretend that we can use science to say that the 2 grams weighs more than the other side.
Okay.
Well, it's bad science if we're using statistics to try to prove it. It's just bad science.
Right.
So
Right.
using the argument that the forests do nothing with climate is
Right.
bad science.
Bad science. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's not only bad
And
science, it's a lie.
it's
It's just
politically
not true.
biased. Yeah, it's politically biased, it's economically biased, and
Yeah.
it's scientifically wrong
Yeah.
to state that forests do nothing to climate in a larger scale.
So
And that's yeah, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
well, I'm going to change some of my questions then, because this is really something that I want to explore, because I think it's where our power lies. And the questions that I had formulated before were, and maybe we'll still use some of them, but it's really about trying to understand what we can do to improve our soil and our plant life, so that we can become an active part of the biosphere again in a way that causes rain, because that's what we need to have happen. If we're going to cool the planet, rain is the only way to do it. We're losing the ice. We don't have a lot of choice there. So we're going to have to do something else. So you talked about scale. So what kind of scale? I mean, does it matter that I'm working with my city? So I'm trying to get my city to claim the soil under our feet so that all the residents will begin to become conscious of the fact that that's a power they have. And that's a help they can give if they're really interested in helping this process. And that if we all do that, then perhaps that will help. But we also have this forest around us that is sort of doesn't belong to anybody. I mean, it's managed by people, but there's no sense of ownership because somebody else is taking care of that, and there's nothing I can do about it. I can't, I can go in the forest, but I can't do anything with the forest. But we had fires this last summer, and I know, and I have to dig the man out, but there was somebody that I heard talking who said there are things you can do to burn forests to bring it back fairly quickly. Are there things you can do to local forests to enliven the soil underneath so that it holds water so that it doesn't burn? I mean, what kind of scale are we talking about? And what kinds of things can people do where they are that would be beneficial?
Yes. One of the interesting things about ecological thinking is that we can't really separate the micro from the macro. We can't really separate a square foot to a continent, to North America, because every square foot in North America is influencing the whole rest of the continent. And it's influencing in so many different ways that we can't really measure or cut, make a hard cut between how by influencing someone it will change the forest management in a few months or years time. So the first thing we need to approach is that every single piece of land matters, to teach people what a forest is. Normally people don't have good understanding what forest, the word
Right.
forest means. So I've been to some COPs. Last one was Glasgow. I couldn't go last year. And I probably not be able to afford going this year as well. So when you go to a COP and sit with the people, the negotiators and the observers to discuss their understanding of how carbon credits are being one of the major economic forces in this new revival or this regeneration narrative, they think they can translate carbon into trees. So they mathematize the thing in terms of how many trees you need to plant to save the planet. It's wrong,
Right.
because it's not about trees.
Right. It's about the
It's
forest.
about biodiversity.
Yeah.
By only having trees, you make the problem worse.
Yeah.
Because there's a fine understanding. It's not deep knowledge. It's common knowledge between indigenous peoples. But between scientists is like topmost advanced knowledge that you need a lot of diversity in chemical and physical compounds to be able to transform water vapor into rain clouds. If you don't have this diversity of aerosols, you won't have clouds. You will have fog. And if you have fog, you will be enhancing the greenhouse effect. So to transform fog into rain clouds, you need biodiversity, because it's biodiversity the source of aerosols. So having people understand this, it's crucial to our whole movement, to our whole task force in regenerating the life on the planet. Because if people don't understand what forest means, they will believe that forest means a monoculture of pine or eucalyptus or olives. So they will see a lot of trees planted together and they'll be happy. Same as 10 years ago, they were very happy because people will be installing solar panels and wind generators. And then today, everybody knows it's a huge problem. It's a huge ecological problem in many aspects. So by understanding that ecological restoration means that you bring back the ecological functions using biodiversity as leverage, what you're doing is having what we already have, that is biodiversity, and just provide the minimal conditions to the biodiversity to thrive in a piece of land, regardless the size. So yes, it matters, but to influence climate in the wind patterns, and we are talking about the wind patterns that comes from the poles and go towards the equator. To influence climate in the scale of atmospheric circulation, of course, a backyard school garden is not relevant. A city garden is not relevant. A city forest or a 500,000 hectares park is barely relevant. We need to approach the thing in the scale of the continents.
Yeah.
But we cannot approach this if we don't have people educated to do it. Otherwise, they'll do it just wrong, because they're being educated with wrong science. So we need to make the bridge between them.
Okay. Yep. What I heard in what you're saying too is the Miyawaki forest method. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
As a really viable tool for doing that, because it helps people understand the diversity piece, and it goes back to original plants, so they're already acclimated to the old climate. And so that might give them a start if we do it quick enough before it's not close enough to the old climate to matter, but if we do it soon enough. And because we're planting the whole forest, that gives an incredible amount of stability and resilience to that little space that we planted, whatever that is. I mean, I have this vision in my city that we could have spots all over the city that would begin to start to keep that balance more stable than the variety of things that we have now. Am I right in saying that? And are there
Yes.
other ways of doing that?
There's plenty of different ways, and they may work better depending on the surrounding conditions and depending, of course, on the site conditions. Like if you're going to start in the middle of a dune in the Sahara Desert, and the closest tree you can find is 2,000 kilometers away, it's one thing. Yeah. You need to bring germplasm, you need to bring biome availability, genetic availability to the site, because you can't find really biodiversity at the place, because there the life has been extincted too long ago. Right. And there's no viable seed in the place that just by watering it, it will become Amazon again. Right. So depending on the surrounding area, you use some techniques or other techniques, and it's one important thing. So I will give you an example of what we can do when we still have some forests around to create more forests with birds. So
Okay.
you have 3 sticks, kind of 6 feet long, and then you make a tripod with them, with a little piece of rope. Can be
Mhm.
vegetable rope. So then when this rope rottens, the tripod will just collapse and everything will be in place. So you have them here, and then you can use the tripod as kind of stakes. So you plant creepers in each one of the pods.
Okay.
So they will start climbing the pods and they will be together at the top here.
Mhm.
So also you'll be planting annual small plants like corn or beans or pumpkins around. But
Okay.
before you start planting them, you can bring some dead shrub or leaves or straw or pieces of sticks of branches and
Mhm.
make a kind of nest inside here. So you can imagine this is around 100, 4 or 5 feet tall.
Okay.
Okay, from here to the bottom, in a way that you can't really stand underneath it, but it's tall enough for you to create a shady area when the creepers go and
Mhm.
when the other plants grow as well. And the straw and the thin branches that you have here, the sticks, they will provide a very good nest for other mammals and for birds to nest. Like the mice will nest here,
Right.
the
Insects.
hedgehogs will nest here, and all the green will be covering this area, preventing it from sun erosion, from mineralization.
Mhm.
So in a few weeks, you have a little patch of green around this, and in 2 or 3 months' time, the annual crops that you planted around here, they'll be producing. You don't
Mhm.
need to harvest them if you don't want. So they provide food for different types of birds. And this is tall enough for other birds to sit on top. And when they come from a patch of forest that is a kilometer away and find this perfect spot that is tall to sit and look around, they try to wait there for a while. And while they wait, they just leave their things full of seeds and fertilizer at the very spot that will be moist and protected from evaporation because you have green patches around. So
Ah, okay.
this is the nesting strategy.
Sure.
You're creating nests and you can have them like 15 per acre.
Well,
Two skilled people can make 15 of these in 2 hours.
yeah.
So it's not really a lot of work to do. And it's extremely effective. And by connecting those nests among each other, what you do is you make them closer. You shorten the space between them, so the mammals can run from one of these places to the other.
Mhm.
Birds can jump from here to here. So the network, the food network, including all the fertilizer that will come with the manure and all the seeds that will be spread around here, it will be massive.
Well,
And it works uh, much faster than if you bring some seedlings from a nursery and plant them in a bare soil.
yeah, no, yeah, I think you all, what I'm hearing from this is that you're doing soil remediation while you're doing that. In the Miyawaki method, you have to do soil remediation first. You do have to do that. It's not like you just pick it up and plant it. You have to make sure that the soil will be receptive. So that's its own thing. But
Yeah.
this combines those two. Um,
Yes, and this is one of the tens of different techniques that we use in ecological restoration, and we choose the techniques depending on how is the site and how is the surrounding. So
Sure.
it always require some landscape reading before choosing the right technology.
So do you have these techniques on your website?
Um, no, I should, but as you can imagine, as a philosopher, I have many skills, but not all of them.
Well, if are they written down anywhere? I mean, if they're written down, it shouldn't be
Yeah,
hard to put them up. Yeah,
yeah,
I might be able to help with some of that. I have some tech skills, not a huge, but it depends on who's hosting your site and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, some of that wouldn't be too hard to do because I think that would be really useful. I think there's a real hunger for different ways of doing that, and that is so simple. That is
yeah,
really simple. The Miyawaki thing is probably a 5-year program because it takes a couple of years to figure out what you're going to plant while you're doing the soil remediation so that you get the plant, and then you have to find the plants because not all of them are locally available, and you have to really research some of that, and then you plant them, and then it's a 3-year thing, so that's fairly quick. But the prep is the long term
yeah,
haul and the hard part. So that's pretty simple. Your method kind of cuts through all that stuff. Yeah.
yeah. You use what you have available, and while it's growing, you understand what's happening. Like in places with hot springs,
Mm-hmm.
um, not hot springs with water, hot season, spring season,
Okay.
uh, and very moist, very rainy spring. This technique will attract a lot of snakes, for example.
Mm,
So the snakes would lie underneath the nests, waiting for the mice and the
right.
birds,
Right.
because they learn that the mice and the birds will go there.
Right.
So you're already starting the whole cycle to work again,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you can see it in 2 to 4 weeks time
Wow.
being populated by them. So yeah, there's plenty of different techniques. This is just one of them. About education, no, I don't have this written in my website, but I have some curriculums of courses that I've taught already. Two of them could be interesting to say here. One of them is called Ecological Restoration in Climate Scale. It's a 16-day course. And the other one is much shorter, is called Advanced Design in Ecological Restoration. So it's for people who already knows a lot about this and who already understand most of the science and the techniques, and we just go deeper into the specific types of approaches. So it's much more about facilitating a process of learning together using uh, questioning. So we ask people questions and ask them to explain why they think it works, and then we can create together better technology.
Do you have projects that you're working on now or have worked on in the past um, that are in different climates other than tropical? Because I think maybe it's my bias, but tropical things seem so much easier. You know, that the heat and the moisture that's so common, it has been common in the tropical climates, just help plant growth. I'm living in a more temperate climate where we have 4 seasons, or we had 4 seasons. They're mushing together, but so it's cooler at times and drier at times. So we don't have that huge amount of moisture that is so common, or heat that is so common in the tropicals. So that makes it, I mean, there's a certain point in the year where things slow down. That may be true in the tropics. I don't know. I think it's more consistent growth season in the tropics than it is in other climates. So when it slows down, that kind of stops things. And I would hazard a guess that it's also something you kind of have to plan for, um, because you have to kind of take care of things during that time when they're more tending to dissolve and disappear because of the seasons. Can you speak to that in terms of
Yes.
real term?
The place we live here is the south of Portugal. It's the Algarve. We live in the top of a very flat hill, but yet it's the top. So the place is full of rocks. Our property here is an acre, so it's a small property.
Mhm.
And we have extremely hot and dry summers. And the rain season isn't anymore really a rain season. It's just the season when we had some rain, but it's
Yeah,
not a season when like you really see the rain.
right.
We've been waiting for some rain for 10 days in a row, and the forecast says every day that tomorrow is going to rain. And today we had some rain. It was half an inch rain, and it's only because the cyclone is passing close by.
Ah,
And we had half an inch after 10 days promising to rain.
right.
So the desert is here, is not coming, is here. It arrived. All the rivers dried completely. We
Mm,
have only flash flood rivers. We don't have rivers anymore. So 3 years ago, we still had some water in the spring. In starting summer last year, we had 3 or 4 days with water in the riverbeds in the
wow.
year. In
Yeah,
the year, there were permanent rivers 5 years ago. So the desert is here,
yeah.
and this is not tropical. We have many days with frost, and in winter it's the only season when you can have things growing, so they can grow when it's hot enough for the plants to grow, when it's like above 10 or 12, because in summer they need to stop everything they're doing, otherwise
Right,
they.
right.
So we have 10, 15 days, maybe a month growth during the year,
Wow.
and all the rest of the year everybody is like waiting for the
Yeah,
opportunity.
yeah, yeah.
So it's the opposite of what I had in the place where I was born and grew up. When
Mm.
you don't have winters, the winters there are like the coldest days, the coldest nights you could have would be like 8 Celsius positive, and you could have maybe 2 months without rainfall, if much, and all the rest of the year is just kind of raining here and there, never too heavy rain. So perfect for growing things. So my experience starts in that place. Now I'm passing here. We don't have snow here. The last snow has been like 25 years ago, a
Wow.
day. So snow is not a problem in this site. But yet, it's possible to do things here. It just takes longer. Like
Mhm.
I'm with a client now. We just started attending. She bought a property here, an acre property, and the advice from the other people were to hire a tractor and remove all the vegetation. So what she did was to hire the tractor, following the advice from the locals, to remove all the vegetation. And the vegetation was the the secondary regeneration, the native trees regeneration of 50 years. And we got to her place yesterday, like 5, 6 days after it happened.
Ah, ah.
So we just got late enough to not be able to stop it. And then she hired us because she doesn't want to make the same mistake again. And so we will need to replant everything. And eventually it will take less time because we can enhance. But our backyard here, our property is divided in two pieces. The front part is where the house is, and the back part is behind the wall, so we don't touch it. We have some hundreds of oak trees and many other pistachia and a lot of other things. It's same type of climate as South California.
Okay.
But it's 3 feet top, 5 feet tall, what we have there. 50 years regeneration. 50.
Wow. Wow.
So yes, this experience tells us that it's possible to regenerate everything and everywhere, but we can speed it up, right? And what do we do to make it faster?
Yeah.
We protect from erosion in the first place, erosion from the sun, erosion from the rain. We protect it from excessive maintenance or management or harvesting, and we protect it from excessive amount of same species or same types of species. Like we protect it from over pasteurizing or over lumbering. So all we need to do is feed the plants and wait for them to become trees, choosing the right trees that will grow faster first to provide some shade, but not too much shade. Otherwise, the others won't be able to grow.
Right.
So as soon as they provide some shade, we can protect the bare land from the soil destruction, from the sun. And once we start having these different levels of shade, we will have more moisture in the ground, and then we can start planting the other trees that will grow understories.
So that sounds very much like the permaculture approach to things with the different levels and that kind of thing. But what I'm not hearing, and you might have said it, but I didn't hear it, was the actual feeding of the soil, which for me is compost and maybe biochar. But I don't know if you're using those techniques or if you have another way of feeding the soil.
We do compost in city backyards. We don't do compost in farms because it makes no sense. We can't spread millions of hectares with compost. It's impossible. It's not achievable. So
Okay.
we feed the soil with the plants. So we plant the plants, the trees, the bushes, the herbs that will leave some leaves, and the leaves will rot. And by rotting, what I mean is they create an environment for bacteria and fungi to grow and use this nutrients to feed the roots of the other plants that are surrounding them.
Yeah, that's how a forest works.
Yes. And instead of bringing things from outside, we are just participating in the process of having the forest to grow back.
Okay.
So we are not really raising the soil with things that we are bringing from outside because it's the plant's job. The plants are already having the atmosphere. They're sucking the atmosphere and turning it into organic matter. So we don't need to prevent the plants to do it and do instead of them. They're already there.
Yeah, yeah.
And also about biochar, we don't need to use biochar. Biochar is a byproduct. Biochar is a byproduct of this carbon dioxide tunnel vision.
Well, I don't know. It was really effective for centuries in South America. I mean, they did it for a very long time.
It's a biased story. I know Schumann. Um, is not Schumann his name? I keep forgetting about his name. I know the guy. I read his books. I know the places where they found the piles and piles and piles of charcoal. Biochar is just a market name. Charcoal is the proper name for that. It's the remains of the
Yeah.
fire pits.
Yeah. Do you know
Uh,
Albert Bates?
so I understand the ecology behind it. I understand how we can use charcoal to enhance it, and I understand how we should never use charcoal to try to do the same, because there are limits of the quality of the charcoal that we're using. We can't go beyond a certain temperature
Right. No,
because,
it has to be done correctly. That's for sure. Yeah.
yes, and
Yeah. No
beyond a
argument.
certain temperature, what I mean is it should never be beyond 380 Celsius. And that's less than the lowest temperature that the biochar people are trying to sell their products. They're trying to sell biochar with 700 Celsius.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't doubt that there are people who are messing with the process. That's something that we seem to be very good at. But I do think, from what I have studied, which is not huge, but that there is a place for biochar, and it has to be done right. Absolutely. I mean, you have to have the right kind of char. It's not, you can't take it from burned buildings and just do that kind of stuff. You have to have a little more intentfulness in how it's created. But I do think also, because of where I live, that we have a huge beetle problem with pine trees. So we have uh, thousands and thousands of acres of dead trees. I mean, you can see it from the air. It's like yellow
How did they die?
or pine beetles. So they were infested by a beetle because it's not as cold as it used to be. And so those beetles don't die in the winter like they have. And so there's more of them to infest pines, and they just go from tree to tree to tree.
Sounds
Uh,
good.
no,
Sounds
it doesn't.
perfect, actually.
I mean,
Because
well,
because
in a small way, yes, it's very useful. But in a large way, like any pandemic, it there's an imbalance, and we're definitely.
sounds Catherine, sounds healthy to me. We have an excess of someone who need to be balanced by someone else.
That could be, but those dead trees are fodder for biochar, because you
I
got to do
understand.
something with them. Otherwise, you have forest fires that you totally can't control,
I
which we
understand.
have been having. So,
So instead of chopping them and turning this into smoke, that is pretty much half of the biochar source. It's
right.
smoke. Instead of cutting them and turning this into smoke, we can use them as the poles that I
Oh,
was
there's
mentioning.
millions of acres. There's millions of acres of these. I
I
mean, we have
know.
more
So
than we.
there's millions of acres to use the standing trees to have the advantage of their structure to build things on top of them instead of chopping them and make a market in with
Yeah, no,
this.
I could see the value for that, especially after a fire, that whatever's standing would be very useful for that kind of thing. And it would be good to do that there. I'm not arguing that. But I do think that there is a role for biochar.
I'm
And
not
maybe,
denying that there is a role for
yeah,
biochar,
yeah,
but
and maybe sites make a difference.
we need to pay attention on the scale that we plan things. Biochar is becoming one of the most pervasive industries in this new Green Deal.
Mm, okay, I'm not seeing that much of it here, so yeah, that's different.
Yeah, what I'm trying to mean is there is marketplace enough for billions of tons, metric tons of biochar per year, and most
Yeah,
of it come from existing forests.
and that's not good.
They are chopping the forest. They are already doing it. They are
Yeah,
chopping
yeah,
real forest.
I would believe it. I would
They
believe
are
it.
chopping
And
real
I would,
forests,
yeah,
making biochar with them, and planting monocultures of pines and eucalyptus.
right. And that's, I would agree with you on that. That's not a good thing.
So,
That's not a good thing.
do we want to make biochar? Okay, let's do biochar with sugarcane.
Yeah, or see, again, I go back to site too, that things should be local as much as possible. And that sort of helps get real around some of that stuff because you have to use what you have. And so yeah, so yeah, I think that's part of our problem. We're so used to scaling things that we get out of the local and then we start destroying the things around us to pull stuff into it. And learning to balance that is one of the lessons that we really need to do if we're going to stay here.
Yes.
So yeah,
So
yeah,
coming from the example that we're giving, that there's millions of hectares with dead pine, it means that the time of the pine prevalence is over. Now someone else need to come.
well, and that's true because it's getting warmer and the pines need a colder climate. So yeah,
Maybe not be the redwoods, maybe the Douglas fir, maybe other plants. We don't know yet. So we need to
right,
use them all and see who thrives.
right, right. I would agree with that. Yeah, yeah,
Because it's cheaper and wiser and faster.
yeah. So one of my questions was about red flags for things, and one of the things we just talked about is a red flag when we stop being local and start bringing things in from way far away. Um, I get, I don't know if you know who Brad Lancaster is. He is a guy who lives in Tucson, Arizona, and he realized that Tucson got more rain than residents used. So they were getting more water than they were using, but they were importing water from the Colorado River 300 miles away at the cost of $80 billion because they couldn't keep the water they got. And they just let it go. You know, they tried to get rid of it, basically. And so he reframed his house first and then his little neighborhood. And then he went to the city and said, look what I did. See, I just took the water that came down and I put it here instead of letting it go there. And we could do this all over the city so the city could keep the water. And that's kind of where I'm coming from with where I am. We're living on an aquifer. So we want water to go down back into the aquifer. But we're not doing that. We're getting water and we're pushing it off into the river so it goes into the ocean.
Yeah.
So if we could change that and start to think about how can we keep water here, all the ways we can keep water here. And the first way is soil. And then it's thinking about land design and how we puddle water so that it has time to go through. We spent billions of dollars developing tanks all over the city that will hold runoff. We dug swales so that the tank underneath would get all the water and it holds it. And then we let it go, but it's still not going into the dirt, you know?
You know why?
Go ahead.
Because it lacks root stratification.
Say more.
You understand the concept of forest stratification. So you have different types of trunks, you have different size of trees, so you have different layers of stories. Same above soil and underground. Say everything that's uh, above, it's same below.
Yeah.
That funny principle that you know about.
Right.
It's this. So everything that's going over the ground, it's going under the ground. So all sorts of branches and leaves and connections and different types of animals that go from one tree to another. Everything that's going in the air is also going in the earth.
Right.
What happens when we don't have stratification underneath? You have same types of roots, same level of roots, so they all behave together in a way that they make small packs surrounded by compacted soil. So they won't mesh together.
Yeah.
And when they don't mesh together, they don't create voids. We cannot hold water without voids because the compacted earth does not have the ability to store water. It's not a sponge. A
Right.
sponge is what? It's a very light thing full of void.
Right. Yep.
We need to create voids, and we don't do it with machines. We do it with
Yeah.
root stratification. So the first thing we need to do is plan the root stratification, and we do it by replacing the trees that are dead with new living species.
And diversity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's one of the
maybe
benefits.
you can have 15, 20, 30, 50 different species in this forest full of dead pines. What about you go 200, 300 different species of trees that grow beyond 50 feet tall?
Hmm.
What about it? All you need to do is do a survey with the local farmers and local foresters and ask the people what trees they believe could grow in this changing climate here. And you have a list. And then you go for it.
I like that you talked about the changing climate because that's been one of the things that's bothered me about the Miyakawa method too, is that it is a changing climate. It's not going to be the same as it was 50 years ago, so, or 100 years ago. So if you go back that far for plants, is it really going to be useful? I mean, are they really going to be happy where they now will have to try and live? So I like that being present just with what is, basically. I mean, we just have to address the climate we got, and try and improve that instead of trying to bring back a climate that no longer exists.
Because the past no longer
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. And it's not going to be the same. It can't be because we've lost ice. There's just no way it can be cooler than it has been. It will never do that. Yeah.
There's a very beautiful approach to explain how it works in ecology. It was developed by a Santa Fe Institute professor. His name is Stuart Kaufman. And the name of this approach is fitness landscapes.
Say that again.
Fitness landscapes.
Fitness landscapes. Okay.
So what this approach says, it says when you disturb a landscape, when you disturb an ecosystem, it never be the same again.
Yeah.
And there is no disturbance, which means it's changing again and again. And now, do you remember Eckhout tool? Now, now.
Yeah.
We keep saying now because it keeps changing and it will never be the same again. So this idea of stuckness in ecology is comes from science, comes from positivism in science. It does not come from real observation.
Yeah.
You ask about red flags?
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the most important ones in local and kind of community scale work is who has the privilege of ownership of the rights. It's not only the ownership of the land rights, it's the privilege of ownership. Like those forests, are they public? Those forests with the dead pines, are they
Yeah,
public?
I think so. Yeah.
Who have the privilege of saying
Yeah.
if this or that can be done or not?
Right. Exactly.
Is this a judge? Is this a chief, a supervisor,
A
governor,
department.
a
Yeah.
department, a head of department, a dean? Who has the privilege of deciding what is nature and what's not nature?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who has the privilege of saying what should be the prevailing narrative on what ecological restoration means? So
Right.
this privilege of land rights is a red flag. And this should be one of the first to be approached. So you can imagine that design and planning continents to face climate changes is mostly about this,
Yeah.
not about
Yeah.
technology.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have the technology. We just have it. We have the technology. We have the money available. We just don't have the privilege of the narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm starting with residents more than anything, because they have control over their plot. They can do whatever they want on their plot. And I'm hoping that as they learn more about what they can do and why they should do what they're doing, and can begin to see others in their neighborhoods, I really want, this is where I want to use technology, where people can say, I'm composting, I'm planting these plants, and they can put it up so everybody can see, and they can see who around them is also doing that and who is not doing that. So they can talk to those people
Yeah.
and see if we can get competitions between blocks of people. Your block is prettier than my block. Okay, that kind of stuff, so that we begin to all work together in a fun way, not in fear and terror and all that kind of stuff, but in fun. And we want to make it more beautiful. We want to make it more green. We want to make it more healthy. I want to live on a healthy plot, but I can't do it if my neighbors aren't doing it. You know, I can do a little bit, but if my neighbors are doing it, I got a better chance. And so we can expand out that way, where we can begin to really support each other in making our place thrive where we live, without even talking a whole lot about climate change or who's responsible or politics.
Yeah. Planting with and in compost is a very good way to start. Definitely.
With or in, I didn't get that word.
With and in compost.
In
Planting in compost.
in couples,
Compost.
compost. Yes. Okay. With and planting in compost. Yeah.
Yeah, because people get to understand how the organic matter is being made. Well, it's being made with organic matter.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. It's just magic. It's just, I mean, I've never talked to anybody who composts who isn't awed by the beauty of the dirt that comes from garbage.
Yeah. And
You know,
then
it's just amazing. Yeah.
when it's mature, it just gets like dark brown
Yeah.
and
Crumbly
almost
and yeah.
sweet. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's just magic. It's just magic. Yeah. It gives you such faith in nature, which I think we've been so separated from it.
Oh,
We
yeah.
just don't trust it, you know. I mean, it brings horrible weather. We don't see the rest of it. So I think
And
composting is a
and the
wonderful thing.
reason why we don't do composting in ecological restoration is because we don't want to accumulate life. We want the life to be spread. So we don't make a pile of organic matter to then spread the organic matter. We just leave it to be dropped to the ground, and then the life would do everything they would do in a pile, in a compost
Yeah.
pile.
Yeah. I think it's both and. I think at the start it really needs help.
Yeah, in the city, definitely
Yeah.
composting is a need to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in the countryside, it's kind
Well,
of,
that's why I was wondering, and I really want to appreciate this because um I guess a part of me is curious about whether it is possible to do this on a, I don't know where we'd get it, maybe from the, I don't know. Um, are there things we can do with forests, the 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 small amount of really vital forests that we have, which aren't huge. It's not the monoculture, but those places where we do have vibrant forests, because they're burning too. And is there a way to um, help compensate for the less rain we're currently getting by doing things that would help the soil stay alive? I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I'm just really curious because it's another way to help mitigate this is to prevent the loss of what we already have.
Yeah,
So I think that's
you're
part of it.
bringing two very important questions here. One of them is a question, and the other, to be a question, need to be understood as an issue, as a question. So I will post first the second one, that is, yes, climate is changing. We are having less rain, and because we are having less rain, we are having our forests to dry, and then they are more susceptible to wildfires. So it's a fact. It's happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening because we have an issue, which which is the atmospheric circulation that had a pattern in the past. The pattern of the atmospheric circulation is
Right.
changing, and we
Right.
don't have something today that we can call yet a pattern. It's changing. It's really
Right.
moving. It's
Right.
like you were driving in a highway, and then you get a bridge or a very strong curve, and then it's a very heavy rain, so your car just like goes floating on top and starts spinning. You don't get to manage to put your car in the right direction before it stops. If you try to do it, you just make it worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what you do is keep accelerating and wait it for it will stop eventually. So that's what's happening with climate. I don't have analytical data to say what I'm about to say. I don't have the data to say it. I don't need the data to say it, because I'm saying this as a belief, not as a scientific truth.
Okay.
So I believe, as a philosopher, I have the right to believe. I believe that the Atlantic current already uh, passed the tipping point, the
I
no
would agree with that.
return point.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
As soon as I realized this, I understood that we've been struggling to understand with old
Yeah.
science something that requires new science.
Yeah.
So we are trying to use the wrong tool for a new
Okay. Yep.
context. So with an old climate approach to a new climate pattern that is not yet a pattern, what we have is bad forecast,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
therefore we
And we keep
have,
trying to go back to where it used to be.
yeah, but there's no go back.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is we are going to have more wildfires because we are still treating the landscapes the same way we did 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have the same climate anymore. We don't have the axes and large hand saws that we had 100 years ago. Today we use just tractors with long arms and automatic saws that cut trees in pieces in seconds. It's a different world. So
Mm-hmm.
we need to use a different type of science to approach this new world. But we're not. We are stuck in the 19th century.
Yeah. Yeah.
So first we need to understand that the climate changes is an issue, but an approachable one. So how can we approach the problem of the forest drying out? And how can we prevent big wildfires to come? Well, we need a different science, right? So we need to understand that the climate patterns are keep changing before it stops spinning. And I'm pretty sure, based on all the conversations that I had in this past almost 20 years working in this field as a specialist, talking with many scientists across the world, it's almost a consensus that while the planet heats up, the climate will become more unpredictable because we
Yeah,
have more energy. And when you have a system with more energy, it tends to move faster. And by moving faster, which means we'll have more convulsions and more revolutions in climate because there's more energy to be dissipated. So,
that's a brilliant clarification. I've not ever heard before. It's great.
so
Yeah,
we cannot predict where the next bifurcation point will be.
right.
A tornado, a cyclone, a hurricane, they are bifurcation points. They are a place where the extreme cold and the extreme heat, they turn positions, they switch positions. So they make the eye because they need to exchange energy as fast as possible. That's why we have the eye. It's the center of the vortex. So the energy will be spinning and we can't predict it. We can guess, but we can't predict the same way we can predict that this is going to fall.
Right.
And if I drop it 1,000 times, it will fall 1,000 times. You can't predict hurricanes 1,000 times right. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So it doesn't work the same way. It worked 100 years ago that you could have a monoculture of pine trees and they would behave properly because the climate had a pattern. It doesn't have anymore, so the beetles don't die. Therefore, the pines will keep dying, and all that standing wood will be subject to be burned. And a lot of people will try to take advantage on it and try to lumber it as soon as possible or make other
Yep.
products that they can sell as carbon credits or whatever. So we're repeating the same mistakes because we're using the same mentality, the same mindset. So we need to switch the mindset and bring life back to the land. So we need to plant other types of trees that didn't exist in that landscape 100 years ago because it was a different climate with a different culture, with different peoples. If we are to stop wildfires to happen, we need to influence climate in a way it can be less harmful. So we need to prevent wildfires to happen, and we need to prevent flash floods to happen.
Right. So what I'm hearing, and my question is, because that's exactly where I am, is we need to influence climate. So what do we do? And I've been seeing the Miyawaka method as one way of doing that, simply because what it appears to me, we need to influence cooling in every way we can and use and influence cooling in the way nature has always influenced cooling, which is through plants. Plants are what really cools. So we need to increase plants, and trees are good plants to increase. But to your point, we're in a different time frame, so we need to play around with plants until we find what works in the situation we're in instead of being quite so directive in it's only these plants, and certainly not monoculture. We need more diversity. The more diversity, the better off we're going to be. I know there's also another one of the things that I treasure about permaculture is the deep understanding and the practices that some people have been using to bring springs and rivers back by rethinking how the water flows over the land and actually manually creating puddles and slow places so that it will seep in. And then also the composting and the other things that you do to bring humus back into the soil. Those things seem to be effective in some places. Are there other things that you know about that help us have an impact to help nature? I mean, because it's really about working with what we got. There's no way we can control it. We can't take it back. We can use the wisdom from the back to apply to the present as long as we're present in that application. Because we've composted for centuries. That's not a new technology, but it has to be local. You don't want to carry compost from one place to another. I mean, it's probably better than nothing if you don't have anything, but it's not really what you want to do. You really want to compost local. You want to keep that cycle going where you are. So what other things can you think of that would be helpful to help the planet cool, to make it help it rebalance in a natural way?
Yeah, that's a very important word, rebalance. That's the word you said, right? Rebalance.
Right. Yep. Rebalance is what it is. Yeah.
The way the carbon markets are being organized, the rebalance will be too far away.
Yeah.
The rebalance will be too strong, and we tend to have an over strong
Yeah.
fight back.
Yeah.
So
yeah. No, we throw everything.
Yes, one of the sad stories about climate changes is that the global warming is just a slice in time of a very large time that
Yeah.
is an ice age. So we are at the very end of this transitional time that is the proper name is interglacial age or interglacial period that is lasting around 15,000 years, and it's to the end. It will go anyway to this direction it's going.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
just
Well,
enhancing all the possibilities to make our life worse.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it will go anyway, maybe in a few centuries, maybe slower, but the way we're doing things, we're going to have feedback is the word for rebalancing in this case. So
Right.
if we have it too much cooling effect, then it will just accelerate too much an ice age, and it will be unstoppable. We don't really want it either.
Right.
Can you imagine north of Mexico with permanent ice?
Yeah.
I don't think I could imagine most of the people who lives in Florida and Southern California and Texas wanting to move to Cuba because it's a bit warmer there.
Yeah. I don't know that that's a real worry right now, though.
I'm pretty sure that this is not a worry, even between climate scientists.
Yeah. 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 No, given the loss of ice, the cold is gone for a very long time. But I do think, at least my optimism would suggest that if we're clever, and if we're consistent, and if we work with what is naturally happening, that we might be able to slow down and again come to a different balance. Because I do think there's a desire from the whole globe, and I truly believe this, from the planet itself, is to enhance life.
Yeah.
And there's been more life on this planet than ever. So there's a real desire to keep that life here. So I think there is a role that we can play in helping that happen. But we do have to work with it. We can't work against it or in resistance to it. That's not going to be effective.
In this direction, as a territorial planner, it's a kind of my job to understand that we need to use the right tools to the right sizes of problems.
Right,
So
exactly.
if we are going to plant 100 square feet vegetable garden, we can use a hole. If we are going to plant a belt around New York, we cannot use a hole. We will need other tools, right?
Right.
If we are going to reforest the whole western range that starts in Mexico and goes all the way up to the Alaska, if we're going to restore the ecological functions of the whole range, we will need different tools than horses and bags with compost.
Yeah.
That may have been a thought some decades ago, maybe a century or maybe even more than a century ago. But we have access to different tools today. So proper tools would involve seed balls with biochar, pre-inoculated biochar. People call them activated, but it's a conceptual mistake to call activated biochar the biochar that you mix with biofertilizer. It's an inaccuracy, because activated means something else. It's a physical property, not a biological property. So we call inoculated.
Okay.
Inoculated biochar, and some types of local clay. You don't need to outsource the clay. It can be produced there. So you make some tons of seed bombs and you put it into one of those airplanes that people use to fight wildfires.
Mm-hmm.
So you put some tons of seed bombs inside those planes and spread them just at the edge, just before the first rain. And then most of these seeds will sprout in autumn and will establish before the snow and will survive during the snow and will grow in spring and will be holding the surface of this region to prevent landslide, to prevent runoff, and to create life on the very topsoil. If they survive next summer, most of them won't. But if they survive to next autumn, then they will be able to create a closer network of mycelium with the existing trees, and then they grow again and again and again and again. So you can imagine 10 tons of seed balls with 2 centimeters, like 3/4 an inch, each one of them, like 10 tons of this. It's plenty of different thousands of hundreds of species all together. They will be pre-fertilized. They will be biologically inoculated in a way that as soon as they have access to water, they will have everything they need to develop. So they can establish in the ground as soon as possible, as soon as they get water, and they eventually may be able to survive to winter and to next summer. If they do it, if they can live for a year, they can live for 1,000 years.
Oh, it'd be good to do that maybe even a couple of years, you know? Yeah.
So you can
So
imagine
that's a
10,
wonderful
10
plan.
you can imagine 10 airplanes like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
One airplane like this can cover many hundreds of kilometers in a day,
Yeah.
maybe in a year, with
Yeah.
all the airplanes that are available in
Yeah.
autumn, where you don't have wildfires anymore.
Yeah.
You could cover the whole range in one season.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not a technological problem, you see, it's a mindset problem, because
Mhm.
the people who have the privilege of the narrative will say that this is not doable.
Yeah.
It's not a lack of money,
Yeah.
it's just fuel
Yeah. Yeah.
and pilots who are going to be paid anyway.
Yep. Yep. Well, David, this has been brilliant. It really has. I really appreciate your time and the vast amount of knowledge that you bring, and certainly new insights for me about how we can do this, because I think we can. We just have to keep at it long enough that those people who have the privilege get it, or people get in place who have the knowledge and achieve the privilege. So, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine, for
Yeah.
having me here and the opportunity to talk to
Yeah.
you again. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Really appreciate it.
Bye.
Thank you very much. So, bye.
Bye.
Wonderful talk.